So I'll start with Kateřina. Because as have been said, ladies first. So what inspired you to pursue the career in diplomacy?
Well, thank you for that question, and it's actually great to be here. You should all know that, in fact, I was a second choice. Originally they planned to put with Matt, our colleague who served in London as an ambassador, but this person said that Matt is too funny. And he's not going, so you should now know that Matt is funny and I'm brave.
Funny looking, I think he said. Funny looking.
But thank you for your question. And I would love to say something like, as a small child, I dreamt about being a diplomat, which is not really the case. I was obviously growing up in communist Czechoslovakia in the 70s and 80s, and that was definitely not something I dreamt of, but it evolved in that I wasn't joining the diplomatic service directly from school. In fact, after I finished university, I tried to travel. And then at some point I was returning back home, and I was thinking about what to do, and I applied for a few jobs, and I ended up in diplomacy. I probably could have been a banker. I would be probably richer, but now I'm enriched. So here I am. It's a great career, but it wasn't really planned.
Thank you. Now let's ask Matt a similar question. Like, what drove you to diplomacy? You're quite famous here, I'd say, in the Czech Republic, especially because of the social media. Like, everybody was watching, especially like your first Czech, sentences on Instagram, like ahoj, já jsem Mattem, jsem tu novej. It was fairly popular. I think it was really smart. But I was looking if you've studied Czech, and I found out that you've studied actually Japanese, if I understand it correctly. So what was your way from Japanese, maybe to diplomacy, though it is a country probably, maybe in your future once, but you can come, but still interesting to end up here.
Sure. Firstly, thank you so much for the invitation. You're not my second choice, Kateřina. Absolutely not. Ministry's second choice. Let's be clear, not mine. But really pleased to have such a fantastic colleague up here as well. I'm also very reassured to hear your story, because I also did not have a plan. Actually,
I still don't.
Yeah, exactly. So when I sort of look back and try to make sense of the different choices along the way, probably the one unifying theme is that I was curious, and particularly curious about spending time in other countries. So when I graduated from high school, I took a year before university. I went and lived in Kenya. I taught for a while there. At university, I actually studied religious studies. So interesting, not particularly useful for this career or any other career really. But it was something I enjoyed, and during that I did an Erasmus semester in Sweden, graduated with this incredible degree and no immediate job offers. So I went traveling also and ended up living and working in Japan, fell in love with Japan, did a master's in Japanese. And at this point I'm beginning to wonder, is there anyone who would be willing to pay me to spend time living in other countries? And actually when you start thinking about that, then you come to diplomacy, and it has been, as you say, it's been brilliant, but it was quite a strange route that I took to get here.
And if I maybe can add on a little more serious note, I was posted in New York in the period 2002-2003, around the Iraq War, and then British ambassador in New York, Sir Jeremy Greenstock, he in one interview asked, why you became a diplomat. He said, for me this was a way to be involved in politics without being a politician. And honestly, that very much sort of says it all for me.
Though on the other hand, you're as well sometimes on a really like a small border, like not to be a politician because as diplomats you cannot, but still to be involved in politics, which must be sometimes difficult, I guess. Anyway, I have here a famous quote from Winston Churchill about diplomacy. Well, diplomacy is the art of telling people to go to hell in such a way that they ask for directions. So, Matt, because this is like your country, so you first, do you agree with that quote?
So, step one, always agree with Winston Churchill. I mean, that's always the starting point. I mean, one of his geniuses, of course, he said, I know that history will be very kind to me because I intend to write the history. So Winston Churchill has always, I mean, a huge influence on all Brits and British foreign policy all the way through. Yeah, so what is diplomacy? I think, yes, I mean, there's an element of being able to deliver difficult messages in a way that still maintains the relationship. I think during the course of my career, yes, it's about protecting, promoting British interests. I'm the British ambassador to the Czech Republic, not the other way around, and I think that sometimes we lose sight of that. But I'm here to represent the UK, all of the UK, not just the government, but British people as well. And within that, yes, sometimes it's about being friendly and charming, but actually quite a lot of my job I find is about the difficult messages as well. It's the difficult conversations. And if you can get the balance right between those two, then you can build the kind of relationships that will deliver long term. So I think the biggest mistake, or maybe the opposite of diplomacy, is sort of transaction. And transaction means a short term, you do this, I do that for you this one time. Whereas diplomacy is about relationships. And that's where it works best, I think.
So, Kateřina, what diplomacy means for you in terms of this quote or like these sentences?
Well, honestly, the quote is actually brilliant. It really is, but it's not the real life, and I very much agree with what Matt said, that it's about delivering messages. It's obviously sometimes it's good news, sometimes it's bad news, or a mixture of that. And you always have to consider the context. You always have to consider who your audience is, what you need to achieve by delivering the message, and how you put that into such a wrapping that no one is offended at the end, but also you reach your goal. You get to where you need to get. And honestly, it's not always easy. Obviously, it's. I hope it's a little more easier for you when you are posted in Prague, even if you need to deliver a message that is difficult, but you still are delivering a message to an ally, a friend. But obviously, you can also be delivering messages in unfriendly country. And it's definitely not easy. Also, we are sometimes delivering unfriendly messages at the ministry to diplomats, ambassadors being posted in here. And then, a completely different game is when you are in the multilateral setting and you are in fact delivering multiple messages to people, maybe all of them sitting in one room, and you need to somehow carry to everyone there, so that then it's really a real balancing act.
We as journalists are very often as well talking with diplomats. Sometimes it's not possible even to write it, and it should be definitely like said. But some of those diplomats already told me, like, wow, I woke up in a situation that really surprised me. So what is, Kateřina, something what really like surprised you maybe the most during your career? Were there like really big surprises?
You mean as an ambassador, or as during the career?
During the career.
You sort of, if you go step by step in the career, you should be prepared for situations, definitely. if you are not jumping ahead and you are not suddenly tasked with a task that is sort of too much for you, for example. But if you really go step by step, that you most of the time you are ready. But that doesn't mean that you don't get into difficult situations where you sometimes are really looking around for how to handle that. And I have to say, for me, some of the most difficult situation were when I served as an ambassador in Geneva at the Human Rights Council. And interestingly enough, that was the sessions where you had the non-governmental organizations speaking. So, during the Human Rights Council sessions, you have obviously speaking slot for member states, and then you always, at the end, you have a slot for non-governmental organizations. And usually these are pretty harsh messages, as you can imagine. And usually the country that is being addressed in those non-governmental organizations' messages is protesting. And for 1 year, I was a vice president of the council, which meant that I also obviously had to chair some of the sessions. And I have to say that I always had this mixed feeling when chairing NGO segments, because it always was, it was much more interesting when the member states were speaking, but you also oftentimes got into a situation when you had member state protesting against whatever the NGO representative was saying. So I would have a delegate of a member state banging their country tag, really demanding this representative to stop. So I have to say that these were really challenging times, and you really need to. Of course, me as a Kateřina Sequensová, I want this NGO representative to say whatever they need to say, but I still need to somehow manage to the clients, which are the member states at that time. So these can really provide situations that can be even surprising.
And Matt, what was for you maybe the most surprising experience during your career as an ambassador?
So I might just start by going back a little bit. So, having said this sort of path I took into diplomacy, so I'd applied for, done the tests, got in. I have to say, on that very first day, as I walked through the door, I still didn't really know what I was getting into. I genuinely didn't know. So what is it we actually do all day? What is diplomacy? What are we actually going to be doing? And so there was quite a steep learning curve, particularly at first, of actually working out what it is. And there's some, quite stressful experiences of trying to advise ministers on that particular subject that you are an expert on. I started off working on the Middle East peace process, so quite an interesting place to begin. But that sort of steep learning curve, combined with those brilliant moments where you might be, say, watching a parliamentary debate, and you see the minister stand up, and it's your words coming out of his mouth, which is amazing, and also quite terrifying in its own way. So that kind of early rush and learning curve. I think one of the biggest surprises, partly that because of that ignorance, is diplomacy. For obvious reasons, we tend to think of diplomats, but the majority of staff in our embassies and most embassies around the world are not diplomats. So the majority of staff here in Prague are Czechs, and so the majority of the people doing our work are actually locally hired experts, brilliant, deep knowledge, all of those great things. So, I hadn't even kind of really begun to understood that quite how much of our work is done by nationals of the country, and that definitely continues to be the case today.
Kateřina, you talked about the challenges, let's say, of the past, or like general challenges, but what do you think are the key challenges for diplomats in the 21st century? We are in the first part, so...
The AI writes better statements than us. No, but it's obviously there are changes. I mean, diplomacy doesn't look like it looked certainly not 100 years ago, but it also doesn't look the way it looked even 10 years ago, honestly. And we need to somehow adjust. And the older you get, it's more and more difficult. That's why you need to motivate new people, younger people, those who are still fresh and willing to learn all that. But really, the new technologies is something that changing diplomacy quite a bit. It's still about the actual person-to-person or in-person meeting and negotiating or speaking or having a consultations and so on and so on. But obviously the new technologies more and more do influence our work. And if the next question is how I think diplomacy will look in 10 years, then I really don't know.
So Matt, what are, from your point of view, the biggest challenges at the end of the first quarter of the 21st century for diplomacy?
Sure. I think it's a good question, and I'd love to hear actually also thoughts from anyone here about this. I mean, the change is absolutely what I recognise even within our careers. I think you can look back on a time when ambassadors were essentially given their instructions, sent off around the world, and report back in 3 years' time. As it sounds kind of amazing and ideal right now, but the fact that you have this instant communication, which has completely compressed all distances, that has, it created opportunities. The fact that heads of state can speak to each other and have direct interactions, or without mediation, frankly, through the likes of us. Pros and cons. But this sort of instant communication, this instant ability to receive information, it just feels like we're under a tsunami of information. So that it's the volume that it's the speed and the volume of information coming at you that really is quite overwhelming. So I think that's the challenge. I think if there's an optimistic note in some of the new technologies, is that if it gives us the ability to try to weed out, the signal from the noise, that would be great. I have to say I'm a bit more on the skeptical side, because I worry that whether it's social media, AI, other things, it seems much better at amplifying our flaws than our strengths at the moment. So whether it's in terms of our biases, inequalities, all of those issues that we carry around with us, that it seems to be amplifying them. So I think that's the scary challenge in front of us as well.
So you can never be up to date, really. Right. You can never be up to date.
So let's come from like that big picture to a smaller picture. We've already heard about some experiences, but Matt, you've been an ambassador to Bosnia and Herzegovina, and now you're in the Czech Republic. So how do you feel being here in the Czech Republic as an ambassador? What are your experiences here? Like, how do you perceive it?
So, Kateřina said it. It's absolutely a friendly relationship, which is great. Bosnia was my first time being as an ambassador, and it's an amazing country. It was a wonderful experience, but it was pretty tough as well. It's a very confrontational situation. There's a lot of entrenched divisions, ethnically, politically, a lot of nationalist rhetoric, and of course a lot of PTSD and trauma from the very recent war there. So big issues to deal with, up to the point of, I had the president of the country publicly announcing that I was the worst ambassador that had ever been appointed, that I was betraying the UK even, that I was racist, xenophobic, my wife was, all sorts of things that became somehow part of the normal dialogue there, and it's quite tough. We know that we're there to represent a country, but in many ways I think the big change of being an ambassador is that you become the face of the country, so it's very personalized, and when that criticism comes, it's very personal, so that's one of the tough things. But then that transition from there to Prague, amazing, because it's absolutely, you know, a partnership. It's a relationship that's very deep, very warm. You know, it really felt as though doors were open. I will say though, it's not always positive feedback. So I think the only way really to avoid criticism is to do nothing, which frankly is not what we're here to do. We're here to be active and engaged and involved, and sometimes that comes with criticism for being interfering or for pushing an agenda, whereas actually I'm just representing the UK and the UK's interest and the UK's values. So I think that very personal identification is part of the brilliant thing of being an ambassador, but it is different and it is more difficult, I think, than the other jobs I've had.
Yeah, I remember doing an interview with one member of parliament in, I think it was July, who really offended and tagged you and X. So it was really interesting even for me, why was he offending you personally? So that's probably exactly what you are saying. But still, you're representing Great Britain. It's a big country, and here in the Czech Republic, everybody knows what Great Britain is. Though you, Kateřina, you've been the ambassador in the Netherlands. I hope and I believe that the Czech Republic is well known in the Netherlands, though it's not Great Britain. So how was your personal experience in your last ambassador post?
It was a great posting, by the way. I really, really enjoyed it. It was the posting in The Hague is interesting also from the point of view that it's a mixed bilateral and multilateral posting. So I served as a Czech ambassador to the Kingdom of Netherlands, but at the same time I was also permanent representative to the OPCW. Which is the organ. Now I can't obviously figure out the acronym, but it's the Organization on Protection Against Chemical Weapons. It has much longer name, but that's the gist. But also, obviously, The Hague is a city of peace and justice. It's a seat of various international courts. So obviously we were also sort of representing Czech interests in those institutions. So it really was a nice balance, or sometimes disbalance, because it's just too much stuff. With the bilateral posting, which is the primary, that's why I was sent to The Hague, but also the multilateral work. As far as for the Netherlands as such, I have to say that I mentioned that before I was an ambassador at the UN in Geneva, and when you are an ambassador at an international organization, it really is no protocol whatsoever. I mean, it's extremely interesting job, but it's you don't have any real diplomatic procedures and so on and so on. While the other sort of end of that spectrum is when you serve at a kingdom, with royal protocol, and that was obviously the case of the Netherlands. The thing is that the Dutch, as informal as they are, although the royal protocol is obviously very strict and everything, it's still fairly easy. There, for example, presenting the credentials is a mixture of a really nice formal ceremony, with the anthem and the presenting the credentials to the king and having all that. But at the same time, when all this is done, he sort of sits with you at coffee or having coffee or tea, and just has a nice chat. And in 15 minutes into the chat, you sort of need to pinch yourself that you're actually speaking with a king, because it's lovely, and you don't feel that you are supposed to be stressing out about not doing this or that. So. And in a way that sort of captures the my posting in the Netherlands, that it's a really nice mixture of things that at the end are really very very nice. That made my stay there very, very nice.
That sounds lovely. Maybe we have some future diplomats here, even after like hearing this, that there are really nice parts of the job. So what advice, Kateřina, would you give such a maybe future diplomat or to someone who is trying or who wants to pursue the career?
Now we maybe lose a few. I think as I can imagine that when someone applies for the work at the intelligence services, that what they watch out is for people who think they want to be James Bond. So similarly, when you apply for a job at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, you shouldn't be thinking you are Kerry Russell in Netflix's Diplomat, okay? We do not fly to our postings by private jets, and not even an American ambassador flies to his or her posting by a private jet. As a matter of fact, when I traveled to Netherlands, I drove by car. I was probably, ponytail, sweatpants, and I had a hamster cage in the back seat. So it's really, it's a fantastic job, but at the same time, it's a job. It's really like right now when I am at the ministry, I'm not at a posting. I'm a bureaucrat. I'm a state official. I'm actually, going to my office and doing my, really regular work. But it obviously has its grand moments. You get to meet people. You have parliamentary or your minister saying in parliament your words, or at the UN you write a speech for your minister or your president, and then you actually hear it. And I agree, mixed feelings, totally. But at the same time, it's not an easy job. The job is based on a rotation, which is the reason why most of us actually join the foreign service. But in time you realize that it actually put a lot of strain on you and particularly your family. It's not about, you might think, oh, it's great, I'll live for 4 years in India and then I'll live in 4 years in Argentina or whatever. But then maybe you have a partner, and that partner has a job, and if it's not, if not a writer or whatever writer, then what he or she is going to do there. And if it's once in a lifetime, 4 years, fine. But you actually spend your life like that, and then you have kids. And then you take them from their little world they have at home, and then you bring them for 4 years somewhere else, and then they get used to it. At the beginning, they don't want to go. They go, and then they want to leave, and they go from one school to another, and this goes like that for your whole life. And it's just really not easy. You have old parents who if you serve in Canberra, you might not see for a year. So all these are at the same time, I still think it's extremely exciting job, and you can see a lot of things and you can learn a lot of things. But just don't look only on the surface. Don't think of a diplomat as someone sort of hanging out with a glass of champagne and negotiating the Middle East peace deal, because that's just not the case.
Well, thank you. So, Matt, maybe some advices from you.
Sure. So, again, I also think it's a brilliant career, and it's been amazing. It's been amazing for me. Part of the attraction, it's worth saying, is that you open the newspapers, you see the big issues, whether it's what's happening in the Middle East, in Sudan, in Ukraine, in many other places, the positive opportunities of countries going through enormous change. You can be part of that. You can absolutely have an influence on that, and that's absolutely part of the appeal. Was to be able to make a difference in some way. And there are good days and bad days in terms of whether you feel you're making that difference, but it absolutely is, it's a privilege that comes with that. I will say, just on the kind of personal side as well, it is totally the same thing, in that in that it's the best thing and the worst thing. So it's starting afresh every few years. I mean, I've loved learning Brazilian Portuguese, preparing myself to go and spend 4 years in Brazil during a time of amazing change, World Cup, Olympics, impeachments, all kinds of just wonderful, interesting, fascinating things. But then packing up the bags, moving around the world, learning Bosnian, immersing myself in something completely different. So, that has to appeal. And I think for most of us in the career, we are the kind of people that are curious about different things. I think if you go in with just one thing that you're interested in, one thing that you want to work on, generally you're disappointed because chances are you're not going to be able to spend your whole career doing that one thing. So that's part of it. And I think that sort of variety. And then just on the sort of family impact side, I mean, it does take a toll in terms of your relationships, in terms of kids if you have them, partners. But it is for many of us, it's a brilliant experience, and I think for that reason, I just can't recommend it enough.
That sounds still very interesting, and I still believe that there are some further diplomats here, even though now knowing the both sides of the job. Anyway, Matt, you're now here in the Czech Republic after all those different posts. So how would you assess the current UK and Czechia relationship, and what areas you probably might find like the most promising for further deepening?
Sure. So I've just actually passed the 2-year point. So I've done 2 years. I've got 2 more years to go. So just gone halfway. And I think the best kind of advice, or at least the best mentality going into it, I think that I heard from colleagues, is you want to leave the relationship better than you found it. So by the end of your time, because you're only ever a custodian, you're only ever the current ambassador, the current person here, and there'll be many before me, there'll be many after me. What I hope to do is to hand over things in a better position than when I started. And I look around. I think during those couple of years, we've had some great things. We've had kind of an increase of our cooperation, especially with our ministry-to-ministry contacts, foreign policy, China, cyber, everything in between. We've had some good progress on trade. We've recently announced an agreement on civil nuclear cooperation. We've had lots of people-to-people contacts. With apologies to have to look out the window if there's any Brits misbehaving on the square out there, but we have. Most British visitors are very well behaved, but some of them aren't. And so we've dealt with those challenges as well, which is also part of being a diplomat. I think in all of those areas, we feel like we're in a good place. But I'm kind of greedy, and I want to leave things in an even better state by the time I pass it on to the next person.
Hopefully after those 2 years, there will be another British ambassador speaking Czech. We will have it like a norm since you. Let's end this part of the debate with an international topic. Kateřina, what do you think are the most pressing challenges for international security right now?
How much more time do we have? Thank you. It's really, the geopolitics of today is just unparalleled in I would say our careers, and it's really is it's challenge on its own. Obviously, starting with and an important part about that is that a lot of it is really connected. When you start with obviously the Russian war of aggression in Ukraine and what security threat it is obviously to the Czech Republic as such and to the whole continent, but also worldwide with regard to food security and energy security and so on and so on. And then, when you slowly move to the Middle East, although at this very moment a bit calmer than the past year and a half, it's still a very volatile region. Once again, a huge security challenge. but also with a great impact on economic security, particularly with regards to the situation in the Red Sea. And then you move to Indo-Pacific with obviously our concerns on Taiwan Strait to South China Sea. But as I said, it's all very connected. So what really troubles us is the connection between Russia, China, Iran, DPRK. That is real. That is, I think, real challenge to any of our security concerns. But it's not only the real battlefields the way we know them, but there are also other battlefields with the hybrid threats, with the cybersecurity, I already spoke of food security in Africa, energy security around the world. Yeah, you name it.
Okay, thank you for answering all my questions. And now I'd like to give the floor as well to you.